politician, having stood many occasions and having been in Parliament during 2 prior parliaments. So she brings some, and I used to sit on select committees with
That's right.
Leslie, and I can actually attest to how she assiduously and very effectively took part in that. I thought that I would just say a few words about the reason why we're proposing to introduce a capital gains tax in New Zealand. New Zealand has some structural problems, and yes, it's true that we have a large government deficit at the moment, $16.7 billion government deficit this year, but and that's a problem, and that needs to be resolved. The larger problem actually doesn't relate to government debt, it actually relates to private debt in New Zealand. This graph here shows how for the last 3 decades debt in New Zealand has been rising. This is New Zealand's total overseas debt. And if you see the 2 colours there, the orange is private debt and the dark brown is government debt. So the vast majority, about 86% at the moment, of New Zealand's debt is private debt, not government debt. And government debt's been coming down over the time, although it's going up a little bit at the moment, or more than a little bit, by $16.7 billion this year, although it's going up at the moment. The long-term trend is for our government debt to be under control, in stark contrast to places like the United Kingdom, those European countries, and problems in the United States. So, but nonetheless, our overall debt is high because our private debt's very high. New Zealand's overseas debt goes up every year if you have a current account deficit. A current account deficit is a measure of what we import less what we export. And at the moment, New Zealand imports more than it exports. And I'm including in that the interest and things that we pay to overseas banks on the outflow side. And where to from here? Well, our current account deficit is projected in the latest budget. This is the National Party's own figures, and it shows the current account deficit goes back to negative 4-point-something% of GDP, rising to 7% of GDP over the forecast period. So we've got negative 7% current account deficit. So what that means is that every year that gap between our imports and our exports, because we're living beyond our means, adds to this debt that I showed you first. So the trend there, which is already bad, New Zealand's one of the most indebted countries in the world. We're right up there with Spain, Portugal, Iceland, Hungary, Ireland, in terms of overall indebtedness, low government debt but high private debt in New Zealand. What it means is that trend continues, and the structural imbalances that we have in our economy haven't been fixed. Final thing or a couple of things I'll say is that this shows up in what's called the net investment position, which is what everyone owns of New Zealand offset by what we own of the rest of the world. And that's a big negative number in New Zealand. It gets worse every year from here on. This is a statistic that Bill English, who I don't know he's been to see you yet, but if he has, you should be drilling him on this, because he quite wisely said that New Zealand's net investment position in the world is one of the most important indicators of the health or otherwise of our economy. And at the moment it's negative 79% of GDP, which is poor, and it gets worse every year hereafter, going out to minus 85% of GDP by 2015. So if the national government's re-elected, then after 6 years of their government, New Zealand will be getting poorer, then poorer, then poorer still. And so that's why we say there are structural problems in the economy that haven't been fixed by the government, and that we need some structural changes, and one of them is a capital gains tax, which directs investment into the right part of the economy, but I'm sure you'll have questions about that. So that's all I'll say at the start. We can,
Gina Vanderhorn. David Lange once said that introducing tax, if you're looking to be re-elected, is political suicide. What do you think about that in relation to this tax?
Yes, well that was the prediction that it would be. He said that particularly in respect of a capital gains tax. And that's been the received wisdom, that this is a thing that ought not to be done because it was political suicide. We chose to do it because we think that New Zealand needs some structural changes. We were worried that this would be unpopular politically, but we thought it was the right thing to do. And so we've done it, and indeed it hasn't been the suicide pill that people had predicted. In fact, our polling stayed pretty static since rather than plummeted. One of the reasons for that is that those who have come out in support of it have been a broad range of economists. The International Monetary Fund, the OECD, the New Zealand Treasury and the Reserve Bank all say that this is a necessary change for New Zealand. So we're in pretty good company.
Frances Wilkinson. I wanted to ask you, recently in the media in Southland there's the possibility of a wind farm near Bluff and some hydrogen research, obviously all renewable energies, and I was wondering what you thought of that.
Well, I think New Zealand, I'll go back a step. I think the world has a drive towards renewables for two main reasons. One is energy security, because some of the traditional sources of fossil fuels on a global scale are running out. And they might not run out for a decade or two, but in public policy terms that's still pretty close. In addition to that, and the increasing cost of fossil fuels, there are environmental consequences of using fossil fuels that are avoided if you use renewables. Now, you may or may not be aware I was Minister of Energy and Climate Change in the last Labor government, and I like to think I achieved actually quite a lot to turn the corner in terms of pushing New Zealand towards renewables, particularly in electricity. And by the time, before in fact, when I was in office, our renewables got down to about 68% of total electricity came from renewable sources, and it's now up to around 80%. And one of the reasons for that, in fact, one of the